August 10, 2019. A Saturday morning in Manhattan, New York City. Outside on the streets, the city is already alive. Yellow taxis cutting through traffic. Street vendors setting up for the day. Joggers running through Central Park. Millions of ordinary people waking up to an ordinary weekend. Nobody knows yet what is happening inside a gray federal building at 150 Park Row in Lower Manhattan. That building is the Metropolitan Correctional Center, one of the most fortified federal detention facilities in the United States. It has housed some of the most dangerous and significant prisoners in American history, drug cartel leaders, international terrorists, some of the worst criminals the justice system has ever processed. And right now, one of the most anticipated trials in modern American history is sitting inside those walls waiting to happen. His name is Jeffrey Epstein. He is 66 years old. He has been inside this facility for exactly 34 days, arrested on federal charges of trafficking young girls. The trial ahead of him is expected to tear open decades of secrets, names of powerful people, evidence gathered from private islands and private jets, testimony from women who have been waiting years for this moment. At exactly 6:30 in the morning, 2 prison guards go to deliver breakfast to the inmates in the special housing unit. They approach cell 1E. Jeffrey Epstein is found hanging from the side of his bunk by a bedsheet, unresponsive. Guards attempt CPR. Emergency services are called. He is rushed to New York Presbyterian Hospital downtown. Every effort is made to bring him back. At 6:39 in the morning, 9 minutes after he was first found, Jeffrey Epstein is pronounced dead. Within hours, the news spreads across every television screen, every phone, every social media platform in the world. And within hours, a question begins circulating that has never fully gone away. Epstein didn't kill himself. But before we get to what happened in that cell, before we get to the broken bones in his neck, the guards who fell asleep, the cameras with no footage, the will he signed 2 days earlier, and the question of who had the most to gain from his silence, we need to start at the very beginning. Because Jeffrey Epstein did not become the most dangerous secret in the world overnight. It took decades. And it started in a quiet, modest neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, where a boy with an extraordinary mind and an extraordinary hunger grew up wanting something that his surroundings could never give him. Before we go back to the beginning, I want to take a moment to share something personal, because this community is everything to me and I believe in being honest with the people who support this channel. My name is Laura. For 3 years I have been quietly carrying one of the heaviest burdens of my life. I have been fighting depression. Real heavy, exhausting depression, while trying to complete my studies in Russia, thousands of miles away from home. I have had to defer my studies because I simply cannot afford to keep going. The tuition fees, the accommodation, the flight tickets home. It has all become impossible for me to manage alone. And what keeps me up at night is this. I have just a few months left before I am officially expelled from my program. 3 full years of sacrifice, of fighting through pain and loneliness and financial hardship, could all disappear. I am 28 years old and I refuse to let that happen. I refuse to give up on myself. If this video moves you today, if any part of my story speaks to you, please click the sealer link in my description below. Even the smallest contribution truly changes things for me. And if donating is not possible right now, sharing this video costs nothing and could reach the one person who makes all the difference. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now let us go back to Brooklyn, 1953. And the boy who would one day become the most talked about name in the world. January 20th, 1953. Seagate, Brooklyn, New York. Seagate is not a famous neighborhood. Most people outside of New York have never heard of it. It sits at the very western tip of Coney Island, that long stretch of beachfront community famous for its amusement parks and boardwalk. But Seagate itself is separated from the rest of Coney Island by a gate and a fence. It is a private gated community, the oldest private gated community in all of New York City. Inside those gates, the streets are quieter, cleaner, more suburban feeling. There is a beach that wraps around the community. Children ride bicycles. Families know each other. It feels in many ways like a small town inside a big city. This is where Jeffrey Edward Epstein is born on a cold January day. He is the first child of Seymour George Epstein and Pauline Epstein, known to everyone as Paula. Both of his parents are Jewish Americans. the children of Eastern European immigrants who came to America fleeing hardship. Much of their extended family perished in the Holocaust. Seymour and Paula married in 1952, just before Jeffrey was born. Seymour Epstein works as a groundskeeper and gardener for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. It is honest physical work. Not glamorous, not highly paid, but steady and respectable. Paula works as a school aide and spends much of her time as a homemaker, caring for the children. The family rents the middle apartment of a 3-unit house at 3742 Maple Avenue, directly across the street from the Kennessee's Israel Synagogue, Seagate's oldest place of worship. Neighbors describe the Epsteins in consistent terms across multiple interviews and biographical accounts. Quiet, gentle, humble people. Kind to everyone on the street. The most gentle family in the neighborhood, one neighbor says. Jeffrey has a younger brother named Mark, born about 18 months after him. Their parents have affectionate nicknames for both boys. Jeffrey is Bear. Mark is Puggy. It is a warm and loving household by all available accounts. A solid, middle-class Jewish family living an ordinary life in a private community at the edge of Brooklyn. And from the very beginning, it is clear that Jeffrey is not an ordinary child. He begins playing the piano at just 5 years old. His teachers immediately notice something remarkable about his musical ability. He is not just learning notes and rhythms the way other children do. He has an instinctive feel for music that goes beyond what most children his age can access. He practices willingly and eagerly. Music will remain a passion throughout his entire life. But it is mathematics where Jeffrey Epstein truly stands apart. From his earliest school years at Public School 188 in Brooklyn, teachers recognize that this boy's mind works on a different level. Mathematics is not just something he is good at. It is something he sees almost intuitively, patterns, relationships between numbers, abstract concepts that most children struggle to grasp even in high school come naturally to him in primary school. At Mark Twain Junior High School, a school known for nurturing talented students, Epstein continues to stand out. He begins earning money by offering private tutoring sessions to his classmates, sitting with them after school, and walking them through geometry and algebra with a patience and clarity that impresses students and parents alike. He charges for these sessions. Money earned by his own mind. Even as a young teenager, he understands that his intelligence is a product that has value. In the summer of 1967, at just 14 years old, Jeffrey is selected to attend the National Music Camp at the Interlochen Center for the Arts in Michigan, one of the most prestigious summer programs for talented young musicians in the entire country. The fact that he is invited there tells you everything about how seriously his musical gifts are taken. He is not just a smart kid who plays piano. He is genuinely talented. He then attends Lafayette High School in the Gravesend neighborhood of Brooklyn. Lafayette is a large, diverse school, a mix of Italian-American and Jewish students in an area that, during this era, carries some social tension between those communities. Former students describe Lafayette as volatile at times. There are accounts of anti-Semitism directed at Jewish students. It is not a sheltered or comfortable environment. But Jeffrey Epstein does not merely survive Lafayette. He thrives academically. He is so far ahead of his grade level that he skips not one but 2 entire school years. He graduates from Lafayette in 1969 at just 16 years old. 16. Most of his former classmates are still in the middle of their high school experience when Jeffrey Epstein is already done. One classmate named Beverly Donatelli, who dated Epstein briefly during school, describes him years later in the biography Filthy Rich, written by James Patterson. He was smart and charming, she says. Different from the other boys. He had something about him. A friend named Gary Grossberg describes him similarly. A diamond in the rough. Someone people recognized as brilliant from early on. After graduation, Epstein enrolls in advanced mathematics courses at Cooper Union in Manhattan. He is a 16-year-old from Brooklyn suddenly traveling into the heart of New York City to take university-level mathematics classes. He then transfers to the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences at New York University, one of the most highly regarded mathematics programs in the world, to study mathematical physics. He is brilliant. He is driven. And then in 1974, for reasons that have never been fully explained, he walks away from NYU without completing his degree. No diploma. No formal qualifications. just an extraordinary mind, a hunger that has no clear destination, and a city full of doors waiting to be opened. He is 21 years old, and he is about to make the decision that changes everything. The Upper East Side of Manhattan. Jeffrey Epstein walks through the front door of the Dalton School and into a world that is completely different from Seagate, Brooklyn. Dalton is not just a private school. It is one of the most prestigious and expensive private schools in the entire United States. Tuition costs more per year than most Americans earn. The children who walk its hallways are the sons and daughters of Wall Street executives, publishing magnates, celebrities, politicians, and members of old-money American aristocracy. And Epstein, a college dropout from a gated working-class community in Brooklyn, has just been hired to teach mathematics and physics. How does this happen? Through pure projection of confidence and intellectual ability, Epstein presents himself at Dalton not as a young man without credentials, but as a gifted mathematical mind who happens to be available. He demonstrates his knowledge. He charms the administration. He gets the job. At Dalton, for the first time in his life, Jeffrey Epstein is surrounded daily by extraordinary wealth. He sees how these families live, how they talk, how they dress. He watches the ease with which old money moves through the world, the private clubs, the summers in the Hamptons, the connections that open every door without effort. For a boy who grew up watching his father tend to park gardens for the city, this is a revelation. He teaches there for 2 years. And during this time something else begins. Former students who later spoke to journalists describe Epstein as an unusual teacher. Some remember him fondly, caring, attentive, genuinely engaged in helping students understand difficult concepts. Others remember something that felt off. One former student named Millicent Young described, years later, a clarity of inappropriateness about certain behaviors, a way he had with female students that did not fit how adult male teachers were supposed to conduct themselves. At the time, nothing formal was ever raised. He simply continued teaching. And then comes the evening in early 1976 that changes Jeffrey Epstein's life forever. A parent of one of his students invites Epstein to an art gallery event in Midtown Manhattan. Epstein initially declines. He says he does not go out much. But he changes his mind and agrees to attend. At the gallery, he runs into a second Dalton parent, someone who has heard stories about the remarkable young mathematics teacher from Brooklyn. This parent introduces Epstein to another man at the event. That man picks up the phone and makes a call. On the other end of the call is Alan Ace Greenberg, one of the most powerful figures at Bear Stearns, one of the largest and most influential investment banks on Wall Street. Greenberg invites Epstein in for a meeting. They sit together. Epstein demonstrates his mathematical mind, his ability to grasp complex financial concepts, his charm and social ease. Greenberg is impressed. He hires him. There is one significant problem with this story. Epstein does not actually have the qualifications he claims. He tells people he has college degrees he never earned. His resume contains credentials that do not exist. Bear Stearns hires him anyway, because what Epstein offers is something that no piece of paper can fully capture. He has a mind that can find patterns in complex financial data that most people miss entirely. He has a charm that makes wealthy, powerful men feel that he understands their world and their concerns better than almost anyone they have met. He has an instinctive ability to read people, to know what they want, what they fear, what they are proud of, and to reflect back to them exactly what they need to see. He starts at the bottom of Bear Stearns, as a junior assistant to a floor trader on the American Stock Exchange. Within months he has moved into options trading. Within a few years he has become a limited partner at the firm, a level of advancement that would normally take decades and require qualifications Epstein simply does not have. He begins earning around $200,000 per year in the late 1970s. In modern terms, adjusted for inflation, that is the equivalent of several times that amount. He is in his mid-20s. He is earning more money than he has ever imagined. He is lunching regularly with chief executives. He is being introduced to the wealthiest clients in the bank. He begins dating Lynn Greenberg, the daughter of his mentor Ace Greenberg himself. Colleagues notice that this relationship seems to provide Epstein with an almost invisible shield at work. Mistakes that would end other people's careers somehow pass without serious consequence for Jeffrey Epstein. He also begins dating Paula Heil, a former Miss Indianapolis who works as a saleswoman at Bear Stearns. Paula introduces Epstein to a world he has never seen, old European money. In 1981, she takes him to England, where they visit the family home of a man named Nick Leese. At the family's countryside manor, Epstein meets Nick's father, Douglas Leese, a wealthy defense contractor with deep connections in the British government and the international arms industry. Douglas Leese takes an immediate liking to Epstein. He invites him to return. He introduces him to British political figures and international elites. He takes him on as a consultant and gives him an expense account. Julian, Douglas's younger son, teaches Epstein to shoot. Epstein tutors Julian in return. For Epstein, this time with the Leese family is his first real immersion in something he has only ever observed from the outside. True generational wealth. The kind of wealth that does not announce itself. The kind of wealth that simply exists quietly and completely, as the background of every moment. And he likes the feeling of being inside it more than almost anything he has ever experienced. Then he ruins it. Epstein begins charging personal expenses to the Leese family expense account. Private flights on the Concorde, the supersonic jet that was the most expensive way to cross the Atlantic in that era. Stays at the finest luxury hotels in Europe. Personal spending on a level that has nothing to do with his work for the family. When Douglas Leese discovers this, he is furious. He cuts Epstein off immediately. His son Julian later tells journalists that his father was deeply upset and wanted nothing more to do with Jeffrey. Meanwhile, back at Bear Stearns, Epstein's conduct at the firm also catches up with him. An internal investigation in 1981 finds that he has made a personal loan to a former classmate that may have violated federal brokerage rules. The firm fines him $2,500, a small amount, and suspends him for 2 months. Epstein denies any wrongdoing, and then he resigns from Bear Stearns. He leaves with his contacts, his reputation, his 5 years of experience at the highest level of Wall Street finance, and a burning, undiminished hunger for more. He is going to build something of his own. And nobody, looking at him leave that building in 1981, has any idea of what that will eventually become. This is the chapter of Jeffrey Epstein's story that has never been fully explained. And in some ways it is the most important chapter of all. Because everything that came after, the island, the jet, the network, the crimes, was made possible by one thing. Money. Extraordinary, almost inexplicable amounts of money. After leaving Bear Stearns, Epstein sets up his own company, Intercontinental Assets Group, operating out of his Manhattan apartment. He tells people he manages money for billionaires exclusively. He sets a minimum client threshold of $1 billion. Anyone who is not already a billionaire, he says, is not the kind of client he is interested in. It sounds impressive. It sounds exclusive. But when investigators and financial journalists have spent years trying to trace the actual source of his wealth, the picture that emerges is deeply troubling. A 2025 investigation by the New York Times described Epstein's rise as built on what the headline called scams, schemes, and ruthless cons. The investigation found that much of his early financial success came not from genuine investment genius, but from manipulation, false credentials, and the exploitation of trusting relationships. One early example involves a man named Michael Stroll, the owner of a pinball and video game company, who invested $450,000 with Epstein in what was presented as a crude oil deal. The investment produced nothing. Stroll sued. The case dragged through courts for years before being resolved on a technicality that left Epstein holding the money. Stroll later told The Times in a single blunt sentence exactly what he thought of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein also continued to use the Bear Stearns name long after he had left the firm, dropping it casually in meetings and presentations to give his operations a credibility they did not actually have. He rented a prestigious penthouse office in the Hotel St. Pierre on Central Park South. He wore the right clothes. He used the right vocabulary. He knew which names to drop and how to make powerful people feel that being associated with him was a privilege. But amid all the scams and schemes and half-truths, there is one genuinely real financial relationship in Jeffrey Epstein's career. And it is the most important one. Leslie Wexner. Wexner is a billionaire retail magnate, the founder and chairman of a collection of major American retail brands including Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, and The Limited. He is one of the wealthiest businessmen in America. And he trusts Jeffrey Epstein with a level of access that almost no one who has studied this case can fully explain. In 1985, Wexner grants Epstein a power of attorney. This means Epstein can make financial decisions on Wexner's behalf. Buy properties, transfer funds, sign documents, all without asking permission first. Wexner later says he believed Epstein to be a financial genius and trusted him completely. He says he had no knowledge of Epstein's criminal activities and cut ties with him in 2007. He has never been charged with any offense. Investigators later found evidence suggesting that Epstein transferred significant amounts of money out of Wexner's accounts and into his own. Exactly how much was never fully established. But what is clear is that the Wexner relationship gave Epstein access to a level of wealth and credibility that he would never otherwise have been able to project. By the time the 1990s arrive, Jeffrey Epstein is living like a man with infinite resources. He purchases a 7-story townhouse on East 71st Street on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, one of the largest private residences in the entire city. It has a staff of 40 people. He has a ranch property in Stanley, New Mexico, an apartment in Paris, a residence in Palm Beach, Florida. And in 1998, he purchases something that will become the most discussed piece of real estate in the history of this case. A private island, 72 acres, in the brilliant blue waters of the U.S. Virgin Islands, just off the southern coast of St. Thomas, surrounded by coral reefs and sheltered inlets, with forested hills rising to dramatic ridges and cliffs. He pays approximately $8 million for it. He calls it Little St. Jeff. Locals have a different name for it, a name that eventually becomes known around the entire world. Pedophile Island. The island is extensively developed under Epstein's ownership. A main compound, several private villas, a library, a cinema, a detached bathhouse, cabanas, a sauna, a flamingo-stocked lagoon, staff numbering 70 people by some accounts, golf buggies to ferry guests around, helicopter landing area so that visitors from the private jet do not even need to take a boat from St. Thomas. A distinctive blue and white building with a gold dome sits on a rocky overlook on the island. Journalists who reported on it before Epstein's arrest called it a temple. A former contractor named Steve Scully, who worked on the island, says it was actually a gym where Epstein worked out, and that inside it was a large framed photograph of a woman that visitors found memorable. In 2016, Epstein purchases a second island, Great St. James, 165 acres, also off the coast of St. Thomas, for $17.5 million. He owns an entire archipelago. He is building a private world that operates by his own rules, accountable to no external authority, surrounded by sea. And within those walls on those islands, in those properties spread across Palm Beach and Manhattan and New Mexico and Paris, something deeply serious is being hidden from view. You cannot tell the story of Jeffrey Epstein without telling the story of Ghislaine Maxwell. The two of them are bound together so completely that understanding one requires understanding the other. Ghislaine and Maxwell was born in 1961 in Maisons-Laffitte, a commune just outside Paris. Her father, Robert Maxwell, was a towering figure, literally and figuratively. He was a large, domineering, intensely driven man who had survived the Holocaust as a young Jewish child in Czechoslovakia, and built himself into one of the most powerful media barons in Britain. He owned newspapers. He owned publishing companies. He sat in Parliament. He was magnetic and terrifying in equal measure. Robert Maxwell raised his 9 children in an atmosphere dominated completely by his enormous personality. Ghislaine was reportedly his favorite daughter. She was pampered, educated at the finest schools, sent to Balliol College at Oxford University, and emerged into adult life as one of the most well-connected socialites in London. She knew politicians. She attended royal events. She moved through the highest circles of British society with the easy confidence of someone who has never had to open their own doors. Then in November 1991, Robert Maxwell's body is found floating in the ocean near his private yacht off the Canary Islands. He is dead. The official conclusion is that he fell overboard and drowned, possibly from a heart attack. But almost immediately after his death, it is discovered that he had secretly stolen hundreds of millions of pounds from the pension funds of his own employees to prop up his crumbling business empire. In the days following his death, The Maxwell business structure begins to collapse catastrophically. Ghislaine is left without her father, without her financial security, and without the social standing that had always been guaranteed by the Maxwell name. She flies to New York. She is distraught and almost out of money. Jeffrey Epstein comes to her aid. He provides financial support. He provides accommodation. When a memorial event for her father is held at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, Epstein is sitting beside her. He in white tie, she in shimmering blue. Together in front of everyone who matters in New York society. They become a couple. And then when their romantic relationship ends, they become something that serves both of them even more powerfully. Social partners. A team. Ghislaine introduces Epstein to a world of connections that he could never have accessed alone. She knows members of the British royal family personally. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, is a close personal friend. She knows politicians. She knows international business figures. She moves between London and New York and Paris with the ease of someone who speaks the language of every elite circle without effort. She introduces Epstein to people. He creates opportunities for all of them. He is the connector. The one who can bring an academic to dinner with a billionaire to dinner with a politician. He is the spider at the center of a web that keeps growing larger. Their contact list, which would later be examined by investigators and journalists alike, reads like a catalog of global power. Former presidents, sitting heads of state, members of multiple royal families, Nobel Prize winners, technology billionaires, celebrities, scientists. The names span the entire political spectrum and multiple continents. Prince Andrew of the British royal family is one of the most significant figures in this network. He and Maxwell are close friends from their time in British social circles. Andrew attends events at Epstein's properties. He is photographed at the Manhattan townhouse with Ghislaine Maxwell. He flies on the private jet. Victim Virginia Roberts Giuffre later testifies specifically that she was trafficked to Prince Andrew on multiple occasions. Andrew has always strongly denied these allegations. In January 2022, he reaches a settlement in a civil lawsuit brought by Giuffre, paying a reported amount in the millions, without any admission of wrongdoing. In 2025, his remaining royal titles are stripped by the British royal family. Bill Clinton, the former president of the United States, is confirmed by released flight logs to have flown on Epstein's private jet multiple times. His office has always said he was unaware of any criminal activity associated with Epstein, and that he had no knowledge of the crimes. He has not been charged with any offense. Donald Trump, who would later become president, is confirmed by released FBI records from 2020 to have flown on Epstein's jet many more times than had previously been reported, a detail that investigators themselves flagged internally. Trump has consistently denied any involvement in Epstein's criminal activities. Jeff, as his close friends called Epstein, attended dinners at the White House. He was photographed at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Palm Beach Club, with Melania and Donald Trump in 2000. He donated millions to Harvard University, over $35 million in total, buying himself the identity of a Harvard man and the academic credibility that came with it. Scientists including those from MIT and Harvard attended dinners at his townhouse. Stephen Hawking visited his private island. None of this is stated here to imply wrongdoing by any individual who attended events connected to Epstein. The evidence shows that many people, including people of genuine moral character, were caught in the social gravity of a man who was extraordinarily skilled at making himself seem indispensable, legitimate, and trustworthy. But behind all of it, behind the dinner parties and the private jet and the philanthropic donations, something else was being built. Something that was not a dinner party or a charity at all. This is the most serious and difficult part of Jeffrey Epstein's story. I want to be honest and clear about what the evidence shows, while being respectful in how I explain it. There is no way to tell this story properly without including this chapter, because this is the reason Jeffrey Epstein's name is known around the world. Beginning at some point in the late 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein built a criminal operation. A structured, organized, deliberate system that investigators and federal prosecutors would later describe as a trafficking network. His method, at least in Palm Beach where it has been most thoroughly documented and prosecuted, was consistent and calculated. Girls, mostly teenagers, many of them attending local high schools in the Palm Beach area, many of them from families dealing with financial difficulty, were approached. They were told there was a wealthy man nearby who needed a massage. They would be paid $200 for their time. $200 was a meaningful amount of money to a 14 or 15-year-old girl from a family that was struggling. They were brought to Epstein's Palm Beach mansion on El Brillo Way. What happened inside that house was not what they had been told to expect. According to the testimony of dozens of victims and the findings of law enforcement investigations, the girls were exploited and abused. And then they were told that if they brought other girls, friends from school, girls they knew, they would be paid again each time. One detective testified to a grand jury that Epstein had told at least one victim directly, the younger the better, when she asked what kind of girls he wanted her to bring. She had brought a 23-year-old friend to the house on one occasion, and Epstein had sent the friend away because he said she was too old. One housekeeper who worked at the Palm Beach property later testified that hundreds of girls passed through that house over the years, sometimes 3 in a single day. Girls who participated in the recruiting process, themselves victims who were now being used to bring other victims, were reportedly told to target girls who were financially desperate, girls who needed money for school, girls who needed money for their families, girls who could be helped with promises of support, education, and opportunity. Federal investigators who examined the case noted that Epstein had personal assistants who managed this recruitment process for him: scheduling, logistics, communications. The operation had structure. It had systems. It was not disorganized or impulsive. It was a managed enterprise. Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, Adriana Ross, and Nadia Marcinkova were named in court documents as part of the Epstein system. All 4 were listed as unindicted co-conspirators in the 2008 plea deal that we will get to in the next chapter. A judge, when sentencing Ghislaine Maxwell years later, described one of these women as a knowing participant and a criminally responsible participant in the conspiracy. Beyond Palm Beach, the network extended further. To the Manhattan townhouse. To the private island in the Virgin Islands. To the New Mexico ranch. Evidence gathered from flight logs, victim testimony, and court documents suggests that what was happening was not limited to a single location or a single period of time. Virginia Roberts Giuffre, one of the most prominent of Epstein's accusers and one of the bravest in terms of her willingness to testify publicly, said that she was recruited from Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Palm Beach club, where she worked as a locker room assistant, when she was 15 years old. She says Ghislaine Maxwell approached her and offered her a job. She did not know what that job would actually involve. Giuffre later testified that she was trafficked to multiple powerful men over the course of several years. She named specific individuals. She fought in court for years to have her testimony taken seriously. She was called a liar. Her mental health was questioned. Her credibility was attacked. The evidence that eventually emerged from court proceedings, from the Maxwell trial, and from the released Epstein files, suggests that what she described was real. There is also the question of the cameras. Multiple sources with direct knowledge of Epstein's properties have described an extensive surveillance system. Hidden cameras placed throughout his homes, including in bedrooms and private areas. A former friend of Ghislaine Maxwell told Vanity Fair that the island was, in her words, completely wired. A woman named Maria Farmer, an artist who worked for Epstein in 1996, described being shown a hidden room in the Manhattan townhouse where teams of men monitored rooms throughout the building using pinhole cameras, including the bedrooms and bathrooms used by guests. Epstein himself, in an off-the-record conversation with a New York Times reporter in 2018, reportedly said that he held incriminating information about powerful people, including information about their personal lives. Multiple former intelligence figures and associates have suggested, in various interviews, that the camera system was not simply a security measure, that it served a different purpose, that the footage gathered was a form of insurance, a way of ensuring that powerful people who might otherwise speak against him or cooperate with investigators had a very strong reason not to. This has never been officially confirmed, but it explains something that almost everyone who has studied this case finds deeply puzzling. How did a man who was being investigated by law enforcement for serious crimes against young girls for years, who had victims willing to testify, evidence gathered by police, and a federal indictment prepared, continue for so long with so little consequence? The answer may lie in what he knew, and who knew he knew it. March 2005. Palm Beach, Florida. A woman walks into the Palm Beach Police Department and tells them about her 14-year-old stepdaughter. The girl had been taken to the home of a wealthy man on El Brillo Way. What happened there was not a simple massage. The woman wants someone to do something about it. The Palm Beach Police Department begins an investigation. They are thorough. They conduct surveillance on Epstein's property. They identify victim after victim after victim. By the time they have completed their initial work, they have identified 36 girls between the ages of 14 and 17. Every single one of them has a story that mirrors the others. Recruited, brought to the house, exploited, paid, told to bring more girls. The case is referred to the state attorney's office. A Palm Beach County grand jury convenes in 2006 to hear testimony. What that grand jury hears is so serious that when the transcripts are finally released to the public in 2024, 16 years later, the judge's written order accompanying their release describes the content in terms that leave nothing to the imagination. The details, the judge writes, will be outrageous to decent people. The grand jury testimony describes Epstein as having raped teenage girls as young as 14 at his Palm Beach mansion. That is not a paraphrase or an interpretation. That is what witnesses testified to a grand jury under oath. The FBI opens its own investigation, officially called Operation Leap Year, in July 2006. Federal prosecutor Marie Villafana drafts a 53-page, 60-count indictment and an 82-page supporting memorandum for her supervisors. The indictment contains counts related to enticement, trafficking of minors, and related federal crimes. This is the moment where justice should have been served. A 53-page federal indictment, 60 counts, dozens of victims, witness testimony to a grand jury, FBI investigation ongoing. What happens next is one of the most controversial and widely criticized decisions in recent American legal history. Jeffrey Epstein's legal team begins private negotiations with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida. The lead federal prosecutor at the time is Alexander Acosta, who will later become the U.S. Secretary of Labor under President Donald Trump, a position he eventually resigns from when the details of what happened during these negotiations become fully public. The negotiations are conducted in secret. The victims are not informed. In fact, emails recovered later show that Epstein's legal team was specifically assured that the deal would be kept confidential, that victims would not be told about it until after it was already signed and approved. This arrangement was later found by a federal court to have been a direct violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act of 2004. The attorneys conducting these negotiations include some of the most expensive and well-connected legal minds that money could buy. Alan Dershowitz, the famous Harvard law professor, is part of Epstein's legal team. Ken Starr, the independent counsel who led the investigation into President Clinton, is part of Epstein's legal team. The combined legal firepower facing the federal prosecutors is extraordinary. After months of back and forth, a deal is reached in June 2008. And when the details eventually become public, the reaction from legal experts, victim advocates, and ordinary people across America is one of pure disbelief. Jeffrey Epstein pleads guilty, but not to federal trafficking charges, to 2 state-level charges: solicitation of a person under 18 for prostitution, and solicitation of prostitution. State charges. Not federal. Not trafficking. Not the 60-count indictment. His sentence is 18 months. Not in a federal prison. In a private wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade, a minimum security county facility. Epstein himself pays for the additional security required to house him there, channeling the money through a foundation he creates specifically for this purpose. And the conditions of his detention are almost beyond belief when you read them carefully. Guards are instructed that his cell door may be left unlocked. He is allowed to leave the facility for up to 12 hours per day, 6 days per week, to go to his office in Palm Beach. He is escorted by a single private security guard that he pays for himself. He maintains access to his lawyers, his business, and, as investigators later discover, access to an unmonitored phone line, in violation of prison policy. He serves 13 months. He is released. He registers as a sex offender, the legal requirement attached to his guilty plea. He signs the sex offender registry, and then he goes back to his properties, his jet, and his life. The victims are told nothing. Not that negotiations happened. Not that a deal was reached. Not that the deal specifically protected not just Epstein, but 4 named co-conspirators, and an unlimited number of unnamed potential co-conspirators from any future federal prosecution. The deal immunizes people who had not even been investigated yet. In November 2018, journalist Julie Brown of the Miami Herald publishes a 3-part investigation titled Perversion of Justice. She has spent years tracking down victims. She finds 80 of them. She documents everything: the abuse, the plea deal, the secret negotiations, the victims who were kept in the dark, the legal team, the prosecutors, the conditions of the so-called imprisonment. The article is read by millions of people and reaches federal prosecutors in New York, who had not been party to the Florida agreement. They begin to look at Epstein again, very carefully, and they conclude that they are not bound by what happened in Florida in 2008. July 6, 2019. Teterboro Airport, New Jersey. A private jet touches down on the runway. Federal agents from the FBI NYPD Crimes Against Children Task Force are waiting on the tarmac. As the door of the plane opens and Jeffrey Epstein steps out, he is placed under arrest. He is 66 years old. He has not been in serious legal trouble since his 2008 plea deal. And for a moment, just a moment, he may have believed that the contacts, the money, the lawyers, the power that had protected him for decades would protect him again. He is wrong. The charges filed against him in the Southern District of New York are federal charges. Sex trafficking of minors. Conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. The indictment covers his activities between 2002 and 2005, the same period addressed in the Florida deal. But New York prosecutors are clear. They are not bound by what Acosta agreed to in Florida. Their district, their charges, their case. Hours after his arrest, investigators execute a search warrant at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse on East 71st Street. What they find inside confirms everything that victims have been saying for years. Hundreds of photographs. Evidence that is described by investigators who see it as deeply disturbing and entirely consistent with the nature of the crimes. Compact discs with handwritten labels containing names. The infrastructure of what appears to be a carefully managed operation. Epstein is denied bail at his detention hearing on July 15. The judge finds that he poses an unacceptable flight risk, noting that he has a private jet, properties in multiple countries, and a foreign passport. He has been found in possession of a fake Austrian passport, listing a different name and a Saudi Arabian address. A man who has been planning for the possibility of running for a very long time. He is remanded to the Metropolitan Correctional Center to await trial. The days that follow are electric with anticipation. Former victims give interviews. Advocacy groups hold events outside the courthouse. The legal teams on both sides begin preparing for what is expected to be one of the most extraordinary trials in American history. And then, just 11 days after Epstein's detention begins, something happens inside his cell that raises the first terrifying alarm. On July 23, a prison officer named Michael Thomas is among those who discover Epstein on the floor of his cell. There is a strip of bedsheet around his neck. He is conscious but has clearly been in distress. The incident is treated as either a suicide attempt or an assault. The exact nature of the incident remains disputed. He is immediately placed on suicide watch. He is moved to an observation cell. The lights are kept on at all times. Any items that could be used to harm himself are removed from the cell. His lawyer Spencer Cuven, who represents 3 of Epstein's victims, tells the press that he does not believe the incident was a suicide attempt at all. He says he believes it was an attack. That someone wanted Jeffrey Epstein dead before he could testify. He says the probability of Epstein being murdered in prison is high. 6 days after being placed on suicide watch, prison psychological staff conduct an examination and remove Epstein from the watch. They determine he is not at imminent risk. He is moved back to the special housing unit, where he is supposed to have a cellmate and be checked every 30 minutes. It is July 30, 2019. He has 11 days left to live. August 8, 2019. 2 days before his death. Jeffrey Epstein meets with his attorneys at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. He signs a new last will and testament, a document redrafted to redistribute his estate, valued at approximately $600 million. Prison officials do not learn that he has signed a new will until after he is dead. That same evening, Epstein's cellmate is transferred to another facility. No new cellmate is assigned to replace him. Epstein is alone in his cell. Investigators later find evidence that on the night of August 9, Epstein has excess prison blankets, linens, and items of clothing in his cell, more than regulations allow. Some of these materials appear to have been torn to create what investigators describe as nooses. Despite regulations requiring a cell search, no search of Epstein's cell is documented on August 9. The two correctional officers assigned to monitor Epstein's section of the Special Housing Unit on the night of August 9 into August 10 are Michael Thomas and Tova Noel. Their assignment is clear: check on Epstein and other inmates in the unit every 30 minutes without exception. It is a simple mechanical requirement. Look through the window. Note that the inmate is present and alive. Move on. Thomas and Noel do not complete their mandatory checks. Camera footage reviewed after Epstein's death shows that during one period of approximately 2 hours, both of them appear to have been asleep at their stations. They do not look into Epstein's cell for approximately 3 hours. At 6:30 in the morning, Thomas and Noel go to the unit to deliver breakfast. They discover Epstein hanging from the side of his bunk by a bedsheet, unresponsive. They attempt CPR. Emergency services are called. He is transported to hospital. At 6:39 in the morning, Jeffrey Epstein is pronounced dead. The investigation into his death begins immediately, and what it reveals adds layer after layer of troubling detail. 2 cameras positioned in front of Epstein's cell had footage that was unusable that night. The cameras were malfunctioning. Investigators note that there were other cameras in the facility that did record properly, showing, for example, that no one entered the section of the building where Epstein's cell was located during the night. But the cameras directly in front of his cell captured nothing useful. Thomas and Noel are later indicted on charges of creating false records, because footage shows they did not conduct their rounds, but their written logs say they did. They eventually admit to falsifying records. They are spared prison time under a deferred prosecution agreement. The 4-hour autopsy is conducted by New York City Chief Medical Examiner Barbara Sampson on August 11. Her conclusion: suicide by hanging. But the pathologist hired by the Epstein estate to observe the autopsy, Dr. Michael Baden, one of the most respected forensic pathologists in the United States with decades of experience, looks at the same body and sees something different. Epstein has fractures on the left and right sides of his larynx, his Adam's apple, as well as a fracture of the left hyoid bone, which sits above the Adam's apple in the throat. Baden states publicly in October 2019 that these 3 fractures, specifically the broken hyoid bone, are extremely unusual in cases of suicide by hanging, where the weight of the body dropping is the mechanism of death. They are, Baden says, far more consistent with strangulation from behind, homicidal strangulation. He adds, going over 1,000 jail hangings and suicides in New York State prisons over the past 40 to 50 years, no one had 3 fractures. Sampson, the official medical examiner, firmly rejects Baden's interpretation. She stands by her determination: suicide by hanging. She says, in 2023, the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General releases its full investigation into Epstein's death. The report documents negligence at multiple levels: failed checks, excess materials in the cell, no cellmate assigned, an unmonitored phone call the night before his death, widespread disregard of prison policies. But the Inspector General concludes that despite all of these failures, there is no evidence contradicting the FBI's determination that there was no criminality in connection with how Epstein died. In July 2025, after a new FBI and Department of Justice investigation mandated by the Epstein Transparency Act, the official conclusion is again reaffirmed: suicide. In May 2026, a federal judge releases what is described as a note written by Epstein before a failed suicide attempt in July 2019. Part of it reads, "They investigated me for months and found nothing. It is a treat to be able to choose one's time to say goodbye. And yet the question has never fully gone away. Because the circumstances of that night, the missing cellmate, the sleeping guards, the malfunctioning cameras, the unusual fracture pattern, the man who held the most dangerous secrets in the world dying 34 days into his detention without ever facing trial, continue to feel, to millions of people, like too many things going wrong in exactly the right order at exactly the right time." Attorney General William Barr, in a moment of uncharacteristic candor, described what happened at the Metropolitan Correctional Center that night as a perfect storm of screw-ups. Perhaps it was. Perhaps. While the world was consumed by questions about Jeffrey Epstein's death, a second figure in this story was watching events unfold from a distance and making her own calculations. Ghislaine Maxwell disappeared from public view almost immediately after Epstein's 2019 arrest. She does not give interviews. She does not appear at public events. She moves to a remote 156-acre property in Bradford, New Hampshire, a rural location far from the city life she had always inhabited, and surrounds herself with former British military personnel serving as private security. For almost a year, the FBI searches for her. In January 2020, prosecutors in New York add new charges against her: conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, sex trafficking of a minor, and additional offenses. A federal indictment is issued. She is a fugitive, legally speaking, even if she has not crossed any international border. In July 2020, the FBI locates Ghislaine Maxwell in New Hampshire. Federal agents arrest her. She is taken into custody without incident. She is housed in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn while awaiting trial. Her legal team files repeated complaints about the conditions of her confinement, arguing that she is being denied proper sleep, subjected to constant monitoring with lights shown in her eyes every 15 minutes, denied basic comforts. Her family says she spends over 500 days in conditions that amount to solitary confinement. The government argues that after what happened with Epstein, no risks can be taken with a high-profile prisoner, whose testimony could implicate powerful people. In November and December 2021, Ghislaine Maxwell stands trial in federal court in New York. The prosecution presents 4 accusers, women who testify about being recruited and exploited when they were minors. Maxwell's defense team argues that she is being scapegoated, that with Epstein dead and justice denied, the system needs someone to blame, and she has been chosen to fill that role. The jury deliberates for 6 days. On December 29, 2021, they return a guilty verdict on 5 of the 6 counts against her. Maxwell is convicted of conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, enticement of a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport minors with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, transportation of a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, and sex trafficking of a minor. In June 2022, she is sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, plus a fine of $750,000. She is currently appealing her conviction. As of early 2026, that appeal has not been resolved. 2 other figures connected to Epstein also face consequences. Jean-Luc Brunel, a French modeling agent who prosecutors say helped recruit girls for Epstein through his MC2 model management agency, is arrested by French authorities in 2020. Before his trial can take place, Brunel is found dead in his cell at La Santé prison in Paris in February 2022. His death is ruled a suicide. The French investigation is closed. Virginia Roberts-Giuffre, the woman who was more publicly vocal than almost any other Epstein accuser, sued Prince Andrew in a civil case filed in federal court. Andrew settled that case in January 2022 for a reported sum in the millions of dollars without any admission of wrongdoing. His titles and royal duties were subsequently removed from him. In March 2025, following the release of new Epstein files, the British royal family strips him of his remaining royal titles entirely. No other person beyond Ghislaine Maxwell has been criminally charged in connection with Epstein's trafficking network. The Department of Justice stated in 2025 that it had concluded its investigation and that no further charges were expected. Many people, victims, advocates, investigators, and legal experts, strongly disagree with that conclusion. The Epstein files. The phrase has become shorthand for one of the most significant and most contested information releases in modern American history. From 2024 onwards, tens of thousands of pages of documents have been gradually released to the public, through court orders, through the Epstein Files Transparency Act signed into law in 2024, and through ongoing legal proceedings. The total number of pages that may eventually qualify for release has been estimated at 6 million. What is in these documents? Court filings, FBI investigation records, internal emails between prosecutors, flight logs from the private jet, victim testimony, evidence photographs, financial records, communications between Epstein's lawyers and government prosecutors, and names, many names. Some documents reveal details that were already known. Flight logs confirming which famous individuals flew on Epstein's jet, testimony describing what happened at his properties, evidence of the financial connections between Epstein and major banks. Others contain things that are genuinely new and significant. One document reveals that federal investigators, in a 2020 email exchange, flagged internally that Donald Trump had flown on Epstein's jet many more times than had previously been reported, or than investigators had previously been aware of. This internal communication was part of materials released under the Transparency Act. Trump has consistently denied any personal involvement in Epstein's criminal activities. Another set of documents relates to Prince Andrew's movements and his relationship with Maxwell and Epstein. Court filings contain testimony that specifically names Andrew in the context of Jeffrey's allegations. A scrapbook that Ghislaine Maxwell had put together for Epstein's 50th birthday, compiled and later provided to congressional investigators, contains contributions from former associates and staff. One entry from a former Bear Stearns assistant describes being left alone with Epstein on at least one occasion and a series of interactions that she found deeply inappropriate. This woman was later identified through an unredacted version of the document. The financial institutions connected to Epstein have faced significant legal consequences. J.P. Morgan Chase, which continued to maintain Epstein as a client until 2013 despite a senior executive at the bank describing him internally as not an honorable person in any way, settles a lawsuit brought by victims for $290 million. Deutsche Bank, which took Epstein on as a client after J.P. Morgan dropped him, settles a related lawsuit for $75 million. The release of the files has not been without controversy of its own. Attorneys representing victims reported thousands of redaction errors, cases where victims' names and personal details, including driver's license information, were accidentally made visible in documents that were supposed to protect them. The Department of Justice established an inbox for victims to report these errors and removed affected documents for correction. As of early 2026, 3 individuals connected to Epstein have had criminal investigations opened as a result of the files. 1. Former Norwegian Prime Minister Thorbjorn Jagland has been charged with aggravated corruption. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has faced an investigation. A 3rd individual has been arrested. No further criminal charges related specifically to the trafficking network have been filed by the U.S. Department of Justice. The victims who are still alive, and there are hundreds of them, with the estate having reached financial settlements with over 200 women, continue to advocate for more accountability, more transparency, more answers. Their names are largely not public. Their stories are largely told through legal pseudonyms and redacted court documents. They are the people at the center of everything that happened, and they deserve to be remembered as such. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison, appealing her conviction. The island has been sold. The Manhattan townhouse is gone. The private jet no longer flies. The files are being released slowly into a world that is still trying to make sense of what they contain. But the questions have not gone away. And perhaps they never will. How does a man build an operation like that, over 2 decades involving hundreds of victims, operating out of properties in multiple countries without being stopped? How does a 53-page federal indictment with 60 counts become 13 months in a facility with an unlocked cell door and daily release privileges? How do cameras malfunction and guards fall asleep on the one night that the most anticipated prisoner in federal custody dies before he ever faces a jury? Was Jeffrey Epstein killed to protect powerful people? The official answer is no. The investigation found no evidence of criminality in connection with his death. But the question lives on in court filings, in the testimony of independent pathologists, in the minds of millions of people who have followed this case, because the circumstances of that night in Cell 1E at the Metropolitan Correctional Center contain so many failures, happening in such precise sequence, that coincidence feels inadequate as an explanation. And the deeper question, who else knew what was happening, and who else was involved beyond the people who have been charged, remains the subject of ongoing legal proceedings, ongoing journalism, and ongoing advocacy by the women whose lives were changed forever by what Jeffrey Epstein did. He grew up an ordinary boy in a gated community in Brooklyn. He had gifts that could have taken him anywhere. He chose to use those gifts to build a world in which the most vulnerable people paid the highest price for the pleasure and the protection of those at the very top. The files are out. Justice, partial, incomplete, disputed, has been partially served. And the conversation about what this case reveals about power and accountability, and who gets protected in America and across the world is one that is still very much alive. It may never be fully finished. That was the full story of Jeffrey Epstein. Thank you so much for staying with me for this entire journey. I know it was a long one, but I believe these are exactly the stories that need to be told fully and properly, with every detail in place, so that the people at the center of them, the victims, the survivors, are never forgotten. Before you go, I want to come back to something personal one last time. I am Laura. I am 28 years old. I am fighting to finish my degree in Russia, fighting depression, fighting financial hardship, and right now fighting against a deadline that could take 3 years of hard work away from me in just a few months. The amount I need is $50,000. I know that is not a small number, but I know that this community is made up of kind, compassionate, generous people. People who understand what it means to fight for something when everything seems to be working against you. Even $5, even $1 from the right person, can be the beginning of something that changes everything. If this video moved you today, if the story or my story meant something to you, please click the sealer link in my description below. And if donating is not possible, please share this video. One share to one person who cares could be the moment that saves my degree. I am not giving up on myself. Thank you for being part of the reason why. God bless every single one of you. See you in the next one.